Hi, welcome. This is the 7th instance of our connected learning webinars. If you've been with us before, you know that these are very interactive. We've got a, a guest who's today Katie Salen, the Executive Director of the Institute for Play, and 4 very interesting respondents from around the world. And we're going to make this very interactive. We've got many people who are watching this via live stream and who are participating there through text chat. We encourage that. This is meant to be an exercise not only to inform you, but to begin to build a community around connected learning. So do participate in the text chat. And if you have questions for Katie or the other respondents, put them in the text chat and we will try to queue them up for the people in the Hangout. So before we get to Katie, briefly, I would like our 4 respondents to introduce themselves. So why don't we start with Kathy?
Hi, I'm Kathy. I'm from Sydney, Australia, and I'm a teacher, and currently I manage a ICT Innovation Centre that is located in a university called Macquarie University, and it's a collaboration between our New South Wales Department of Education and the university. And I've been working in the area of games design for the past 5 years, looking at developing programs and workshops for teachers to help them integrate game design into curriculum. And I run boot camps for students to come and work with me at the centre where we introduce them to good game design principles. And I guess one of the projects that I have developed recently is a metagame that is aimed to teach students the basics of good game design while playing the metagame and designing and building a game. And I guess one of our really exciting recent developments is I'm working with local independent game developers who are collaborating with me on a variety of projects with school students, and that's been a very exciting initiative that we've started this year.
Thank you. Randall?
Yeah, hi, my name is Randall Fujimoto. I'm here in the Los Angeles area, Southern California. I work for a new nonprofit called Game Trained Learning, and we're focused on promoting game-based learning in both schools and in organizations. Some of our programs include teacher workshops. For example, we're giving a teacher workshop, fully online teacher workshop, teaching them how to use Minecraft in their lessons. So programs like that we're trying to encourage and develop.
Thank you. Vanessa?
Hi, I'm Vanessa. I'm from the University of Malta. I actually currently working as a lecturing part of the academic staff at the Faculty of Education. So we teach pre-service teachers. So we're teaching people how to teach and how to prepare themselves to school. And we're currently looking towards creating this community of teachers who are more comfortable with working with games and game-based learning and integrating them into their practices. I'm also currently teaching also integrating learning technologies modules, so that is the integration of all these technologies for the classroom and for classroom-based practice. Currently it is also interesting that in Malta we are also promoting this kind of attitude in a national technologies fair, an exhibition where students are actually coming to participate in workshops, and our own students are currently participating in a number of game creation activities and modules for school children who come to visit this IT fair and exhibition. So there should be quite some nice participation there.
All right. I hope to hear, I know we'll hear more from all of you later. So let's get to Katie. If you're interested in more background on Katie Salen, I did do a video interview for a blog post for DML Central a while back, and I'll put that in the chat in a little while. But as I explained, Katie has the very intriguing title of Executive Director of the Institute of Play. And why don't you tell us what's new and exciting in your world, Katie?
Sure. So hello, everybody. It's really fantastic to have everybody here. So what I thought I would do today is I just want to, I'm going to share my screen now with you all because I have just about 5 minutes that I want to share just kind of experience from the work that we're doing to kind of set the stage for what we'll talk about. All right, so I run a nonprofit in New York called Institute of Play, and we have about 16 full-time people working with us right now, and we're about 4 years old. And a third of our staff are full-time game designers, so people that have worked in the games industry but have become intrigued in working in a different kind of context. A third of the staff are learning scientists, former teachers, former principals, that have a lot of experience thinking about the design of learning and also working with young people. And then we have about a third of staff that are strategy people, creative director, communications person. And our work has really been centered around the intersection between games and learning. And what that means is that we have designed things like schools, which I'll talk a little bit about today. We design software, we design games of all types, we design professional development programs to support teachers around connected learning. We develop and run after school programs and summer camps. And what we're really interested in trying to understand is how do we take the idea of connected learning, which is a way of thinking about learning that crosses the home space, the after school space, and the school space in ways that support outcomes for kids that both have resonance in sort of academics, in career, and also in civic engagement. And understand what game contribution could be to that conversation. And so the question that we work with is this idea or question of what game design might contribute to the design of connected learning. So my background is in as a designer. I started as a graphic designer and then moved into interactive design and then into game design. And our point of view is really a design-led point of view. So we're really interested in how we take theories of learning, theories of engagement, theories of design, and turn those into practical on-the-ground interventions, sometimes provocations that might shift the way that we're thinking about the support of young people in a very media-rich world, in a very design-rich world, in a very, very, very connected kind of world. And one of the very first projects that we did was the design of a new public school in New York City called Quest to Learn, which opened back in fall 2009. It's a 6th grade through 12th grade school. It's a regular public school. It's non-selective. Any kid in the city can come to it. And it was a school that was designed from the ground up around the core principles of game design and play. And then we recently opened a sister school in Chicago just this past fall, which will also be a 6th through 12th grade school. It opened with 6th and 7th grade. It's a charter, public charter in Chicago. Again, it's non-selective. Any kid that wants to go there can go there. And the work was really about trying to understand if we believe that there is a different way of thinking about the design of learning for young people and really thinking about learning as a set of experiences that are linked and connected in ways that, again, have relevance for kids across contexts, then we really have to think about the design of all parts of the learning system. And so for us, the reason that we began to look to games as a core intervention strategy is just their very systemic nature. And in the work that I'd been doing for a number of years and teaching game design both at the university level and then beginning to work with young people, it became really clear that games are beautiful models of systems, dynamic systems that change over time, and that when young people are building games, they're building models of things, and they're beginning to see how making choices within those games or altering rules or changing the space has an impact on the overall system. And we felt that overall that was a really wonderful strategy to think about the design of an institution like a school. And so when we designed the schools, it was important to us that we looked at it holistically as a system. And so it wasn't just about designing a curriculum or wasn't just about training teachers, but it was about redefining what the classes look like, what the pedagogy look like, the philosophy of how we think about technology, relationships with how we work with parents, what the discipline policy is, what the approach to leadership was. And so all of that work really grew out of an understanding of an application of how you take the core principles of how games work and then apply them to the design of a different kind of system, which in the case of the schools were schools. And so that's been a really interesting body of work. And I wanted to talk about some of the core principles that have really guided the work. And they were principles that we had in place initially and have really been fleshed out over the couple of years that we've been working in the schools. And then I wanted to talk about two stories of some things that have happened in the schools, a way to kind of narrativize and bring to life these concepts. So for us, the very first key principle, and I often talk about design principles because, again, as a designer, we have to figure out, well, how do we take a kind of theory of what a game might do, or what good learning looks like, and translate it into an actionable principle that a designer can use when approaching the design of some kind of system, whether it's a piece of curriculum, whether it's a professional development program, or whether it's a school. And so the first thing that we talk about as a core principle is this idea of creating a need to know. And so one thing that games do in a really wonderful way is that they drop players into these complex problem spaces where players are actually asked to do all kinds of really weird things sometimes, and often those things are very hard. But the player is willing to learn how to do them because this need to know has been created by the game space and has become an engaging and motivating frame for them to learn how to do a bunch of stuff. And so at the schools, when we work with teachers to design curriculum, the very first thing we ask them to think about is, how do you create a need to know in your students? So we don't start with the idea that, okay, we have to teach fractions and decimals, and then therefore what are we going to do? We think about, well, what are interesting complex problem spaces that fractions and decimals would be a kind of activity that kids would do to help them solve a problem or do work in that particular problem. So need to know is this one core principle. A second is that we often talk about game design as the practice of creating spaces of possibility. And game designers create spaces of possibility through the design of rules. And so when we work with our teachers, we're asking them to think about, well, how do you create a space of possibility for your students to tinker, explore, hypothesize, and test assumptions? So instead of, again, thinking about needing to teach a particular kind of content, you start with that content, but again, what you're really looking to design is some kind of space of possibility that gives learners a chance to kind of push against the edges, explore how things work in that space, develop theories, hypothesize, test assumptions. And so that's just a shift in mindset when working with teachers about how you would even approach the design of curriculum or designing a professional development module for working with teachers. So what is that space of possibility? The third principle is this idea of a sort of flat classroom. And so one thing that connected learning really values and game communities really value is the idea that expertise and authority is both shared and distributed across players and learners. So instead of imagining that the expertise resides only in the teacher or only in a subset of kids in the class, you're really trying to design experiences where all kids have a chance to take on some kind of role of authority and develop expertise in something that they then have a need to share with other students in the class. So we're always looking at, how do you design experiences where learning is reciprocal, where students are doing peer learning with each other, where students might be contributing knowledge with an outside partner, for example, exchanging information. And that's something that game spaces do very well in an organic way, is that they sort of demand that different people play different roles, and that sometimes you are leading and sometimes you're following, but there's always a sense of reciprocity and sharing. And so as we're working with teachers to design curriculum and design games, we're always trying to think about, well, how do you build in a structure for sharing? and a need for students to share with each other. And then how do you build in roles around kind of authority and leadership? And we found, particularly in the middle school, that that has been a really powerful strategy, often for kids who are struggling, because when given some kind of authority and recognition as an expert in something, they really thrive. And then the last point, which is perhaps the most complex, but maybe the most central to the model, is the idea that we're in a connected learning model. You're always trying to think about designing multiple overlapping pathways towards mastery. So instead of thinking about in a classroom or in a content area that there's only one way for students to move through the content, you want to think about in the school where are multiple opportunities for students to do practice on competencies that you're working with them around. And this also means thinking about the design of experiences that maybe begin in school, move to the after school space, and then also are then some work done on at home, done on in an online space, or vice versa. They might start around an interest in the after school space or home space, and then get brought into the school in ways that the classrooms sort of take up those interests. And so in the schools that we've developed, we think about for any piece of curriculum, the notion that there's sort of multiple spaces where kids will have a chance to work on that content or on those competencies, and that the way in which they do that work may look very different. So we have a highly technological, like a motion capture lab that deals with embodied learning, and some kids will see the content in that space and really get it. Sometimes they're doing work with textbooks, sometimes they're doing a kind of role-playing exercise where they're taking on identities of Spartans and sort of marching around. And so that notion of the multiplicity and the overlap of opportunities for kids to learn around core ideas, we've also found to be really central to the model. And again, something that games do really well, they're constantly sort of giving you shifting opportunities to do work around a core set of mechanics. So I just wanted to bring those principles to life. I just want to talk through two specific stories. So this is Luna, the young woman on the screen here, and she entered the Quest to Learn school in 6th grade. And she had a cousin at the school, Kofi, who's next to her. Or not, this isn't her cousin, but she has a cousin at the school. And he was a big gamer. And she wasn't so much a gamer, but she loved to hang out with her cousin. So she spent time at his house, and he was into Minecraft. And so she decided to play Minecraft because she liked hanging out with her cousin, and it seemed like an interesting game to play. And so Minecraft, if you don't know it, is this game about world building and creativity, and you learn how to, in a 3D space, learn how to build spaces and houses and all kinds of things, really in order to protect yourself from very scary monsters that come out at night. But it's a wonderfully flexible tool, and she and her cousin spent a lot of time playing in a really kind of hangout way. He was really starting to geek out in it because he wanted to learn how to build levels, but for her it was more a social thing. But she loved to write, and she really loved storytelling, and so she and her cousin helped start a club at the school, a Minecraft club. And because there was an interest in it, one of the game designers who work with us at the school started a Minecraft server. And so they could play on the Minecraft server during club time, but also during after school and when they were at home. And their friends that went to other schools were on the Minecraft server. And she started to look around the forums, and she found that there were these people that were sort of writing stories, that other people were building out the worlds of those stories in Minecraft. And so she then began to start writing relative to the work with Minecraft. And so she was writing stories that enabled other people to build environments in that world space. And then her teacher, her social studies ELA teacher, because she knew her pretty well, supported her work around the sort of Minecraft playwriting by allowing that as a contribution that she could make for a class project that they were working on, really supported her and mentored her in the sort of writing for this work. And so there was this strong ecology of opportunities that were happening for her, both around academic skills like reading and writing, around the interest-driven types of the career type things where she was interested in the writing, but the story space of Minecraft gave her a wonderful context in which to work, as well as the civic space. So Minecraft has a wonderful, some of the servers, wonderful ways that they work with young people around understanding the sort of rules of the world, and what does it mean to share and build and those kinds of things. So for her, it became this really rich space, and it was really made possible by some of the principles that had been put in place at the school, around club structures and the fact that teachers were open to strong technology integration, open to integration of games into the classroom, and this, again, thinking about the multiple overlapping spaces in which kids might be working and learning. And so from this work, one of our biggest takeaways is that in thinking about the design of connected learning experiences, it's all about the connectors. And so one of those big connectors is adults. And so when we thought about the design of the schools and in the design of our work, this is Don, who is one of our full-time after-school mentors. And he does work both in the after-school space, but also in the during the school day space, supporting one of our media design and technology classes. And what we found is that with the connected learning, game-like learning model, it's really critical that adults act as kinds of translators for kids between things that they might be interested in. So here's a picture. This was a DJ workshop that they were doing. And this is a young woman who's deeply interested in being on camera. And she was part of our online newspaper club, and she loves to go around the school interviewing people. And so Dawn is finding ways to connect those interests to her in-school interests in some of her other classes, as well as make connections to things like, performance in the context of sort of being a DJ. And so I would love to talk to our other guests today just about the role of how they have thought about the adults in the game-like models that they've been working with, the types of expertise that those folks need, and what they really bring to the model in terms of working with young people. So I'm going to end there with a sort of formal part, and then I just want to have a conversation really with people around some key questions, and Howard, you can shoot those out as seems fit.
Okay, I'm sure that that Kathy and Randall and Vanessa are eager to go. So before I put any of my questions in, I'm sure you have your reactions. Why don't we hear from you?
I just love the fact that at your school you are really trying to connect the students' passions, through a teacher to real authentic learning, and that's something we aspire to do, but it's very much dependent on the different contexts and the teachers of classes, whether students' passions are recognised in that way and then thought to be able to be used in an educational context. That's great to hear that story.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Randall, you have any thoughts? Vanessa?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to kind of follow up on one of your principles was spaces of possibilities, and I guess I take that as a safe place for kids to be able to fail and fail a lot and fail comfortably and know that it's okay to do that. Kind of my follow-on question to that, and I've been thinking quite a bit about this lately, is that to you and to the other people here. Is that when you have when you're encouraging failure so much, and we're kind of in a nation where I don't know if you've seen Brene Brown's TED Talk about shame and how we have a shame epidemic in this country, and I know teachers and parents are all they're worried about the self-esteem of their kids, and if you're encouraging kids to fail, even in a safe place, does that affect their self-esteem, and how do you make the trade-off there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I would love to hear from Vanessa and Kathy too about the way they think about this. So the first thing we did is we actually don't use the word failure. We talk about it as iteration. And so in the school, we have a really design thinking as one of the core competencies that all classes work on. So when students are doing project-based work, which isn't all the time, but there's a strong mentality around that you try out an idea, and what doesn't work about that idea is just an iteration of it. And you're then taking the piece that you learned from it not working to move forward. And so in the school, we reframed it that way. And what it has led to is a kind of a real confidence in students around being problem solvers, because they know that good problem solvers actually do have terrible ideas, often the whole first half of the process. And then the way that the teachers work with them is that they're not paying attention to the sort of failure of it, but they're asking the students about, well, what's your takeaway from this experiment? What did that teach you that you now can move forward in? Like, what's a new theory now that you have that you've just proved that doesn't work? So that's been a big thing, and we actually have a rubric around iteration, and that word is used. We talk about prototyping and iteration in all classes. So if they're working on an essay, the writing process uses prototyping and iteration, but we call it prototyping and iteration in their design classes and in all of their classes. And so that's been really, really useful. And that shift in not even using the word failure or being called a failure has led to a kind of confidence in kids that just haven't had it before. And also teachers, the curriculum design process is really visible. So game designers are embedded in the school. They're working with teachers every day. Kids see their curriculum being designed for them, and it doesn't always work. And so we embrace their feedback on that. So they actually see the adults failing, but it's a kind of iteration. So they play test the games that we develop for them, and so the process is very transparent around iteration. And so that has really, we didn't plan it that way, but that's been a huge outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know. I can add on to this. Two things actually. So as regards to failure, I've just returned back from a conference in the UK about enhanced learning, and basically I think that one of the themes which emerged was this kind of celebration of failure, but without really, calling it failure maybe, but as Katie said, that sort of iteration. But this can also be seen when professional sports people are practicing sports, and you can actually see that these people the measure of success depends very much on this idea of trying out new challenges, new experiences, which don't always succeed, but at the end of the day, it makes them a bit stronger. So it gives them this one step forward to go about. There's another thing which I would like to comment about, and that's about something which Katie said before, and that is this idea of this holistic school, or the design of this holistic school is not just about training teachers or providing resources for teachers. It's not about that. It's about holistically approaching it, not just from the teacher perspective, but also from the student perspective, from the parent perspective, from the administrator perspective, from the pedagogic perspective. So it's a kind of this holistic approach, and this also does include this idea of how to approach failures, or rather how to celebrate these trials, this experimentation, because I think the experimentation is one of the main ideas behind the innovation of it all. So if we really want to propagate this idea of having students who will be innovators and who will be creators, then we cannot just tell them, you have to succeed all the time, because that is not taking a risk. And risk taking is one of the elements which draws people into a game, and which creates this engagement with games itself, and with other activities, basically. So I think I'm very, very impressed with that point which Katie brought out.
Yeah, so can I just build on that a second? So connecting that to Randall, you used the word a safe space when you were talking about the space of possibility, and that is actually a huge point that's often, I think, overlooked in this work. So a couple of years ago, I was giving a talk, and I said, game designers, their whole job is to design an environment in which a player can be successful. And if I, as a designer, don't achieve that, it's my fault, not my player's fault. And when I first started working with schools, one of my perceptions was that, wow, many classrooms are not designed with that in mind. They're actually not designed as spaces that expect that all students will be successful. And when the student isn't successful, they blame the student, not the design of the environment. And so game designers, it's that, you know, they think about that notion of a safe space in the sense that you want to design environments where players feel totally empowered to take risks, to fail, to try stuff out, but they trust that that if they do that, that they're going to be successful, right? And so that's what I love about game design, and why we have designers in the school working with teachers, and that the kids see that this curriculum is being designed for them, is that kind of relationship of trust, that the kids will enter that space and take those risks because they have a sense that the teachers and the game designers are really trying to design these spaces for them to be successful. And so I think that there's an enormous amount of work to be done to really understand, how do you design these types of spaces where they're trusted spaces, where they're safe spaces. Like, it's not an easy thing, particularly for many kids who have come up through the school systems where, you know, it's about failing on tests, it's about their grades, and all of this is not to say that we're not rigorous and that we're not that kids aren't learning these experiences, because sometimes people think when I talk like this that it's this like soft, there's no rigor. It's in fact incredibly rigorous. It's just shifting the emphasis and the responsibility onto the everyone, again, in a systemic way, rather than it's like the kids that hold the key to their success or failure.
You know, I just want to briefly take the opportunity to connect some of what you're talking about with the very rich discussion that's going on in the text chat. And there's discussion there about how do you situate your game play in, I'm sure you hear this a lot, in regard to state standards. How do you deal with the unconvinced?
Yeah, so you know, all of the work in our schools starts with the state standards. That's the starting point. And we use a backwards design method where, you know, what a game designer says is, well, what are the constraints that we're going to start with, and then how do we design around those constraints? So for us, the standards and the state standards in the Common Core is the starting point. And then again, we ask questions around that need to know. So if there's a state standard around kids needing to be able to deal with representations of data in multiple ways in multiple contexts, and that may be in the context of a math or a science class, we then do work with the teacher to say, well, what's a 10-week-long complex problem space that you could drop kids into, where it gives them a practice space and for doing work with data, with representations of data. And then in the beginning of the process, asking the teachers to think about, well, what's the evidence of learning that you would see if a child is showing that they know how to use this? So we start with the standards and we start with the evidence, and then we move towards the design of the experience that gives rise to opportunities to do work on those particular competencies and with those particular types of content. And then the second piece of that is that people always ask about the standardized tests. So because we're public schools, the kids do take those standardized tests. And we only have data on the New York school. It's because it's been open for 2 years. And, you know, the kids have done, they're higher than average, better than average across the city on the standardized tests. But they've also shown gains in some of the 21st century competencies that we really care about, systems thinking, time management, that we're not seeing gains in a kind of control group of kids that had applied to get in the school but ended up going to other schools. So to take a standardized test, you actually have to know you have to understand the rule set of how a test works. Right, so a lot of the curriculum and game-like work that we do in the school doesn't look like a test, right? In a lot of traditional classrooms, kids get a ton of experience with what traditional tests look like. And so we have to build in opportunities to the integrated game-like context for kids to see the types of questions that'll appear on tests. You know, if they have to write essays, they have to be familiar with that form. They have to have experience working in like timed classrooms, right, where they're given a certain amount of time to do something, because that's part of test taking. So we look at the way that tests work, again, just as kinds of constraints and rule sets, and we also find ways to integrate that into the curriculum so that kids are getting experience and practice, but it's not like test prep, right? They're doing test prep, but they don't, it doesn't look like they're doing test prep because they're so engaged with really working on the larger problem in which that test prep has been situated.
Do any of our respondents want to jump in on this issue of, you know, somehow connecting this really exciting form of learning to the kind that's expected from the state standards and from the parents, from the standard curriculum?
I guess,
go ahead, Kathy.
I was just going to say what you're saying, Katie. You know, I love to hear about how you've got the school designed and working with the designers and the teachers to implement this approach. It is hard back in schools where you don't have that sort of support, but I guess one thing that we're really promoting through our centre is project-based learning, which is a little bit similar to what you're saying. So you're starting with a driving question or a challenge, and the students are, it's a student inquiry process, so the students are developing projects. But I guess the move towards the students having the time to do iterations of their work is something that I guess classroom teachers, first of all, that concept is quite alien to many teachers, but to have the time within a constrained term to give the students opportunities to iterate on their work is an interesting concept. It's something we're working towards with teachers in the design of learning and the design of learning spaces to work through iterations, but that to have students doing that too is something that we're working towards. But there are a lot of challenges in the way of that. So it's great to hear how you have dealt with that within a school context.
Yeah, so just quickly on that, one of the, so that question often comes up around time. So one of the things we did in the school, and again, it's not unusual, lots of schools do this, but we moved to a block schedule, school schedule, so where kids are often in 88-minute long classes rather than sort of 45-minute long classes, because it's really hard to think about doing something in I just find it very hard in 45 minutes. Like, you know, how do you iterate through something? So we moved towards that model where, and we also have an integrated curriculum at the middle school. So we have a class where math and science is together, and a class where English language arts and math are together. So again, kids are getting, you know, they're in a block schedule, but they're seeing math in two different domains. They're seeing English language arts in two different domains. And that's been really useful, and also helps with the design of interesting problems, because it's hard sometimes to think about an interesting problem that's only about math or only about ELA.
Yes.
Because games are not siloed in that way. That's one thing. And then the other thing is just a philosophy around homework, is that some schools think about homework as like almost like sometimes busy work, or they just like skill building. But we try to think about the home space and then the after school space as, again, as an extension of that iteration space. And so when you begin to think in that way, instead of like breaking up, like the classroom is one kind of activity and then homework's another kind of activity, you suddenly begin to get more time. Because again, it's integrated in a way where everything kids are doing is working towards this larger problem. So you can take the big piece and break it down into smaller chunks, but really have the larger set of time to deal with. So that's one way that we've dealt with that. The Chicago school is because it's a charter, it has a extended school day, or a little bit longer. So they have actually more hours in the day for students to do work. And so it's been interesting to see the differences between just like a regular public school and a charter school in terms of where you can kind of intervene. So can you have like a longer school year or a slightly longer school day? So even an hour longer in a day really gets you something. So yeah, so that's been interesting. But time is it is something to think about as a space to innovate around, I think. So
yes, yeah. Some of the schools are looking at those immersive blocks, but it's only beginning, I guess. Some schools are doing that sort of thing and others aren't. But the concept, even though they might have longer blocks of time, the concept of giving students the opportunity to iterate on their learning is probably fairly new. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the other, and I actually think Australia is quite a leader in this, is that the other shift is moving towards a competency-based model of thinking about assessment, where what you care about are not discrete tasks, but you care about the multiple opportunities to see growth in a kid against a competency across classes. So what that means is that you're not grading homework as like the discrete task doesn't matter that you did the homework. What matters is that the teachers, the sets of teachers are for any particular kid looking for growth and a competency across time, across the school. And once you start to do that, which impacts how you do assessment, how you track evidence of learning, that also has an impact on how you would think about the use of time, right, during a school day. Because if it's a competency that you see in a couple of different classes, all of that time together is an opportunity for kids to do work on it. And so iteration then is necessary because you're looking for growth. You're not just looking for completing an assignment, if that makes sense. I mean, it's a little subtle, but so that's been and quite a shift, I think, for our teachers to be like, what, we're not counting homework as a grade? Like, if it doesn't count, what are we measuring? And we're like, well, you're actually measuring the learning and against the competency. You're not measuring that they did a piece of homework. And so, for example, we have been looking, I would love to hear from people if this exists, an online content management tool that's competency-based rather than like grade-based or activity-based, because the technical infrastructure reinforces the sort of tropes that you're actually trying to work against. So if you don't have the tools that let you look like across kids, across competencies, across the school, and you only can look at an individual kid in an individual class with individual assignments, then that becomes problematic.
Yeah.
Randall, did you want? Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, so just about this thing about competency-based, I think many people are using portfolios as one way of actually assessing competencies in students, because they build up gradually through a period. So it's a kind of a longitudinal, it's not just a one-off assessment of a particular content, so it's all a mix. So many people are moving towards these online portfolio management systems where people can actually collect and collate their work. But there's also something else which I wanted to add regarding to the challenges which one finds when trying to create such schools and in the mindsets of teachers, of parents. And I think it takes a lot to start, that mind shift towards an environment and an experience which is based also on this kind of mentoring idea, when you have teachers who actually shift to become more mentors, and therefore the students are more actively involved in what activities they do. And I think that is difficult, and that is a hurdle which will be encountered at first, but that I also believe that when the results start coming over, then it will no longer be a hurdle or perceived as a hurdle, because people will actually start feeling so much more engaged, and the parents will also start feeling the level of engagement through the activities that the children, their kids, start getting involved in. I mean, we had a very small minor experiment, and we were working with this online game, and when the students were so enthusiastic about it, and they went at home to tell their parents about it. The parents wanted to do this at home as well, so that they can be part of what the children were doing. And this was something very small. So I mean, when these sort of results, and not as in scores or grades, but when these sort of results start coming and trickling inside the home, then I think that it will be much easier for the mind shift to occur.
Yeah, I think that that's a really important point around. So the schools that we developed, the default setting is collaboration.
Mm.
And so we actually don't hire teachers that aren't willing to actually have a lot of people's hands in their work with students. That's other teachers, that's game designers, that's the school leader, it's other kids. And so what we hear from teachers, and one reason the teachers that choose to come teach at the school is that they love how they talk about feeling supported, because they're not the sort of isolated classroom teacher where it's their domain, they're doing what they want to do, but they may feel as if, well, no one can help me with this, or I don't know what else is going on in the school. And so that's again a value of the school, that it's again a very open, transparent, super collaborative. And if you have a collaborative mindset, that notion that lots of different people could be experts and contribute expertise to the work you're doing, it feels like a natural fit. But it does require that sort of shift in mindset away from that you are solely responsible for the education of the children in your classroom. And what our model says, and I think the connected learning model really says, is actually lots of people are responsible for supporting the learning of young people, and there are so many ways for people to participate. And you mentioned parents, and that's a huge one. It's finding ways for parents and grandparents to become engaged with supporting not only their children, but other kids in the neighborhood and around things that they might be interested in. And so I think that's one of the powers of the connected learning model, if we can really get it up and running, is that it takes this broad, holistic, collaborative approach to shared learning and shared ownership over education of young people.
Something that something that we've been experimenting with, and I'd be curious to see, Katie, whether that's something that you're doing at your school, is putting students in the role of learning designers, so that they are designing the learning in all sorts of spaces for other students. Is that something that your students do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we one way that they do that is that the students start by playtesting the different we call them missions and quests, which are the bigger challenges. And so they have a hand in the sort of input, and then they begin to see, well, what's the process by which the design happens. And then as they get older, they get more opportunities to begin to design some of those, those learning experiences in small ways in the middle school, but the goal is in the upper school that the older kids will design experiences for the younger kids, because we think that that's hugely important.
Yeah. And would that also include assessment?
It would. So for us, learning and assessment are connected. Yeah.
So the students are designing the assessment of that learning as well as the learning.
Yeah, so I will say we haven't gone very far down that road yet, and so it's something we want to do more of as the school develops, and because it does seem like a huge opportunity. So I'd love to hear if you have experience with that.
Yeah,
I know that Randall's been wanting to jump in here for a minute. Randall, you want still have something to say about that?
Yeah, I'm actually enjoying what I'm hearing, though, but I'll jump in. I have a few points, and from all this great talk going on, it seems like I keep thinking like, oh, there's another thing I want to say about it. But I just want to talk maybe just a couple of things quickly. A note about assessment. I guess when you talk about, like Vanessa talked about portfolio learning, maybe this is a place where badges kind of fit in. I know we have DML Central people on live stream and read a lot of stuff about badging on there. But another comment I had about the test taking skills, and it seemed to me that having to teach test taking skills, it seems like our time could be spent better doing something like actual learning, like learning skills, like collaboration and creativity and that kind of stuff. But because going through school myself, I learned how to take a test, and that was a skill I learned. But I don't know if that's like a very valuable skill as to have in my future life. So to have to spend the time just because the kids have to take these standardized tests to teach them how to get used to a test, it's just something seems wrong, a little bit wrong with that to me. The other thing I wanted to talk about was that the idea of the project-based learning that Katie and Kathy brought up, that and how it relates to games. It seems like a lot of these game projects, like Minecraft, for example, like the story that Katie told about, that the girl there, can be, they're basically just project-based learning activities using games. And I think there's a good overlap there on how we use games in project-based learning activities. And in bringing that back to connected learning, project-based lessons don't have to take place just inside the school area. They can involve museums and libraries and outsiders, communities, parents, everybody. So all these big projects, whether or not they include games or not, they can, they connect all the people that are affecting the learners. So that's the only point I wanted to make about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to touch on the test taking thing for a second. So I definitely hear what you're saying. The way that we think about it is that part of what a game player does in any game that they enter is they try to understand what are the rules around how this world works. And you actually can't make progress in a game without understanding what the rules are, what the expectations are, what is it that one must do to be successful in this space. And so that's that skill, that's the skill we're working on with kids, is when let's say you've never taken a multiple choice test before and you see one, it's useful to have a little bit of practice in understanding, well, what's the kind of rule set of this particular test? What is it expecting of me? And so it's actually in that context of being able to decode a system and understand sort of how it works, then in order to be able to just move beyond that. So, taking tests are a part of everybody's life, even after you get out of school, like a driver's test. That notion that you are in control because you can break down a system and understand how it works, that's really the skill that we're doing work on. We just don't want to handicap kids to send them into a standardized test that they've never sort of seen that format before, and what they then struggle with is like, oh, I don't know how to write this sort of structure. I've never seen it before. We just want to make sure kids have some familiarity with being able to break down the system so that they can, share what they know.
Yeah, can I just follow up on that? That in a really good learning game, it seemed like all you have to do is play the game, and you don't need to take the test. That's your assessment already, right?
Yes.
So if education is structured properly in the future, sometime in our perfect world, that we'll have these kind of activities that there won't need to be these standardized tests, because the activity itself will be the actual assessment, right? Yeah,
absolutely. But still, games scaffold how you move through that space. So that's in some sense, the built-in learning how to work in that environment, learning how to take a test kind of space. So yeah, so that would be the vision, is that, so I don't know that standardized tests overall are bad. Our point is more that the policy around them has led to a lot of kind of outcomes that are just not great for kids. So, and that's more, we're not against standardized tests, we're just against how they get used. And so we're looking for kind of different vision of how we might think about assessment to potentially do work on the policies around that.
Katie and others, questions from live stream.
Yep.
What would you say about ways to apply these principles that are not necessarily game-based to the curriculum? I notice you're the Institute of Play, and not all play is game-based. You look a little puzzled about that.
Yeah, so can you re-ask the question in a slightly...
Well, you talked about your design principles.
Yeah.
At the beginning, and there's a question in the live stream: are there ways that you can think of to apply these principles that are not directly in a game environment in learning?
Absolutely. So one distinction I'll make is that the school is not a game, and not everything we design are games. Like, the school itself has been designed around these core principles. So that is something that's been designed that's not a game. the principles come from games, but they're actually used to design things that aren't games, but operate in a game-like way. So that would be the distinction that I would make there. And what our job is at the Institute is we're trying to figure out, well, how do we develop these principles that can be taken up and used to design things that aren't games, but again, draw on the values of the way that games work to create interesting and engaging and effective learning experiences. So we use those principles when we design workshops for working with teachers. We use them to design curriculum. We use them to design software and different kinds of tools. So for us, it's the application space is quite broad. I don't know if that answered your question, or the question.
So we've got 5 minutes left, and I know that you've got a hard stop at 11 o'clock, and I want to give our other respondents an opportunity to jump in on any of this. Don't be shy.
All right, so Kathy, I'm just going to ask you about what are some of you think the biggest challenges that you see in your context in moving in or continuing to move in this direction, and also some of the biggest opportunities that you see for advancing the connected learning work?
I guess, yes, I guess some of the biggest challenges is around time, teachers having the time and the opportunity to engage in conversations and to collaborate with others outside of their context, outside of their school, so that they are beginning to have intelligent conversations around things like connected learning or project-based learning or different ways of pedagogy or those conversations are happening in online spaces, but when you look at the percentage of teachers in those online spaces compared to what we've got in our New South Wales schools, which is one of the second biggest departments in the world, it's very small. So that's one of the challenges. I mean, there are ways that some of the solutions are the ways that we are trying to solve that. We use various technologies to facilitate connected learning. We have video conferencing facilities in every Department of Education school to connect teachers. Some are used frequently and well, others are dusted and never used. We are promoting virtual spaces where teachers can develop communities around particular concepts and ideas. So that's something that is being promoted, but it's hard work. We're a very large system with, thousands and thousands of teachers and students, and to facilitate, to transform change is very difficult. But I guess what I'm seeing now, and it's through, I guess the biggest change has been through the advent of social media in getting ideas and different across to teachers. And I would see now that there's a fairly critical mass occurring in teachers in my context in New South Wales. And I know that in the particular region that I worked in, ideas like project-based learning and ideas like developing game-like environments in schools, what's happening is we're getting schools embracing and integrating projects like that in those schools, and they're seen by other schools, and so it's this snowball effect. And I guess the biggest way that we've been able to affect change, we're a very small institution, but we have worked at the ground level with teachers and students in these ideas rather than running just professional learning workshops. I guess what we're doing is trying to simulate what you're doing within one school, but looking at doing it within projects, that the whole package that you've got in one school, we're trying to put out in individual schools in a project form. So they're working with game designers and with teachers and other people.
Great.
Okay, we're at the top of the hour now, so I know that Katie needs to run. This has been a great session. We could actually go on for, I'm sure, another hour with this. Maybe we need to return certainly we need to return to this topic. So thank you, Katie, and thank you, respondents. Next week, on Tuesday at 9 a.m. Pacific time, we're going to have Mark Sermon from Mozilla Foundation. So do tune in. Tell your friends. We've had a great conversation in the text chat. We're really working on building community here, and we'll have more community features to tell you about. So do come back, and thank you all.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.